Katie Sullivan checked the scanner readings for the third time in 10 minutes. Something felt wrong. The space around them seemed too quiet, too empty. She was only a cadet on her first real mission, but her instincts were screaming that danger was close. The patrol vessel Starbound moved through the darkness between stars, far from any human settlement. Katie sat at her station on the bridge, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. Around her, 7 other crew members went about their duties. Most of them had years of experience. She was the newest, the youngest, and definitely the most uncertain about what she was doing out here. Commander Jake Morrison stood near the captain's chair, reviewing reports on his tablet. He was a solid officer with 15 years of service. Next to him, the navigator plotted their course through the Outer Rim territories. These border regions were always tense. The Kreth Empire claimed this space belonged to them. Humanity disagreed. Ships from both sides patrolled here, watching each other, waiting. Katie's scanner suddenly lit up with contacts. Multiple ships moving fast, coming from behind a nearby asteroid field. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Commander, we have incoming vessels," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. 4 contacts, Kreth, configuration, closing fast. Morrison's head snapped up. He moved to her station in 2 quick steps, looking at her screen. His face went hard. "Battle stations. All hands, this is not a drill," he ordered into the ship-wide comm. His voice was calm, but Katie could hear the tension underneath. The crew moved quickly, each person rushing to their position. The Starbound was only a patrol vessel, lightly armed and built for speed rather than fighting. Against 4 Kreth warships, they had almost no chance. "Try to contact them," Morrison said to the communications officer. "Tell them we're on a peaceful patrol mission. Remind them about the border agreements." But Katie already knew it wouldn't help. The Kreth ships weren't slowing down. They were spreading out, forming an attack pattern. This wasn't a warning or a challenge. This was an ambush. The first blast hit their port side before the comm officer could finish sending the message. The ship shook violently. Katie grabbed her console to keep from falling. Alarms started screaming throughout the vessel. Red emergency lights began flashing. "Shields at 40%, someone shouted. "Return fire," Morrison ordered. The Starbound's weapons fired back, but it was like throwing rocks at a mountain. The Kreth shields absorbed the hits easily. Another blast struck them, this time hitting the engine section. The ship lurched sideways. Katie's stomach dropped as the artificial gravity flickered. "Engine 2 is offline," called out Chris Palmer from engineering over the comm. His voice was tight with stress. "Engine 1 is damaged. We're losing power fast." More hits rained down on them. The Kreth weren't even trying to disable the ship carefully. They were just pounding it with everything they had. Katie watched her screen as their shields collapsed completely. The next hit would tear right through the hull. "Life support is failing in sections 3 and 4. Another crew member reported. "We need to evacuate those areas." Morrison's face was grim. He knew what everyone else was starting to realize. They couldn't win this fight. They couldn't even run anymore. The engines were too damaged. "Prepare escape pods," he ordered. "We're abandoning ship." The crew started moving toward the escape pod stations. Katie stood up, but her legs felt weak. This couldn't be happening. They were going to lose the ship. They might all die out here, and no one would even know what happened to them. But then something worse occurred. As the first escape pod launched, a Kreth weapons blast caught it. The small pod exploded in a bright flash. Katie watched in horror as 5 of her crewmates died in an instant, just gone, erased from existence in a heartbeat. "They're targeting the pods," Morrison said quietly. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. Katie recognized that tone. It was the sound of a man accepting the inevitable. The Kreth warships surrounded them now. The largest one moved closer, extending a docking bridge toward the crippled Starbound. They were going to board. Morrison looked at the 2 crew members still alive with him on the bridge, Katie and Chris Palmer, who had rushed up from engineering when his station became too damaged to stay at. "I'm sorry," Morrison said to them. "I'm going to surrender. Maybe they'll take us prisoner. It's better than dying here." Katie wanted to argue, wanted to say they should keep fighting, but what was the point? They had no weapons, no shields, no engines. The ship was dying around them. 3 people couldn't fight off a Kreth boarding party. The docking bridge connected with a heavy thud that shook the whole ship. Katie heard the sound of cutting tools as the Kreth forced open their airlock. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors. Lots of them. The bridge door opened. Kreth soldiers poured in, huge reptilian figures in dark armor. They carried weapons that looked big enough to punch holes through walls. Their eyes were cold and predatory. One of them, even larger than the rest, stepped forward. His armor had markings that indicated high rank. "I am Commander Zelkor," the Kreth said in rough but understandable human language. "You will surrender your vessel." Morrison stepped forward, keeping his hands visible and empty. "I am Commander Jake Morrison of the Human Space Patrol. I surrender this vessel and my crew. Under the terms of the Galactic Convention on Warfare, I request that my crew be treated as prisoners of war." Zelkor looked at Morrison for a long moment. Then he did something that made Katie's blood turn cold. He laughed. It was a harsh, cruel sound. "The Kreth Empire does not recognize your conventions," Zelkor said. "We do not take human prisoners. You are pests infesting space that belongs to us. We will make examples of you." Katie felt the words hit her like physical blows. They weren't going to be prisoners. They were going to be executed. "You have 1 hour to make peace with whatever gods you worship," Zelkor continued. "Then you will be ejected from the airlock. Your bodies will drift here as a warning to other human ships that dare enter Kreth space." Morrison tried to negotiate, tried to appeal to mercy or honor or anything else he could think of. But Zelkor wasn't interested. He ordered his soldiers to take them to the cargo bay. Rough hands grabbed Katie's arms and pulled her along. She stumbled, her mind racing. This couldn't be how it ended. She had just started her career. She had so much she wanted to do, so much to see and experience. She couldn't die here, not like this, not without even trying to fight back. The Kreth soldiers pushed Morrison and Palmer into the cargo bay and sealed the door. Katie tried to stay with them, but rough hands grabbed her shoulders and yanked her back. Zelkor pointed at her with one clawed finger. "This one comes with me," he said. "The young one will break easily. She will tell us about human military positions before she dies." Katie's heart hammered in her chest as 2 soldiers dragged her toward the bridge. She didn't resist. Fighting now would be pointless and would only make them watch her more carefully. She needed them to underestimate her. From the way Zelkor looked at her with contempt and amusement, that wouldn't be hard. They threw her into a chair on the bridge. Zelkor dismissed most of his soldiers, keeping only 2 guards with him. He clearly didn't think one small human female could be any kind of threat. Katie kept her face blank, but inside, her mind was working fast. She looked around the bridge carefully, trying not to be obvious about it. The Kreth had taken over the Starbound's command center, but they hadn't changed much. Most of the control panels were still active, though the Kreth had locked out the weapons and communication systems. The environmental controls were still accessible from a panel near her chair. That was interesting. Zelkor stood in front of her, his massive form blocking half the light in the room. Up close, she could see details she had missed before. His breathing was slightly labored. All the Kreth soldiers seemed to be breathing harder than normal. They were also moving a bit slowly, almost carefully. Then it clicked in her mind. The Starbound's atmosphere and gravity were set for human comfort. Lower gravity than most species preferred, higher oxygen levels, and warmer temperatures. The Kreth were adapted to heavy gravity worlds with thinner air. Being here was uncomfortable for them. Their armor had breathing systems to help, but those systems had limits. "Tell me the locations of your military bases in this sector," Zelkor demanded. Katie said nothing. She just stared at him. He moved closer, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled like rotten meat. You will talk, human. Either now, while it is easy, or later, after we make you scream. Choose. Katie kept her face neutral. Inside, she was terrified, but she had learned how to hide fear growing up in the mining colonies on Titan. Life there had been hard and dangerous. You learned to be tough or you didn't survive long. Her father had taught her that looking weak only made bullies worse. Zelkor raised his hand, clearly planning to strike her. Katie didn't flinch. She watched his movement carefully, noting how he had to adjust his balance in the lower gravity. He wasn't used to this. His reflexes were calibrated for different conditions. As his hand came down, Katie moved. Not away from the blow, but toward the environmental control panel. She dove from the chair. Her smaller size and the low gravity giving her speed Zelkor couldn't match. Her fingers hit the controls, activating the emergency override sequence she had memorized during training. The system recognized her biometrics. She was a crew member. She had access. She locked the environmental controls to maximum human optimization and disabled the override codes. The changes happened instantly. Gravity dropped even lower. Oxygen levels spiked. Temperature increased by 10 degrees. The emergency lighting switched to a spectrum that human eyes handled well, but that gave Kreth trouble. Zelkor stumbled, thrown off balance by the sudden gravity change. The two guards staggered. Their breathing systems started making warning sounds as they struggled to compensate for the rapid environmental shift. Katie didn't wait to see what would happen next. She ran for the maintenance access panel she had noticed earlier. Every ship had them. Narrow tunnels that let crew members access the guts of the vessel for repairs. She yanked the panel open and threw herself inside. "Stop her!" Zelkor roared, but his voice sounded strained. The environmental changes were hitting him hard. A guard reached for her, but Katie was already pulling herself into the tunnel. The Kreth soldier tried to follow, but his massive armored body wouldn't fit. He was too big. The tunnels were built for human-sized crew members, not 8-foot-tall reptilian warriors. Katie crawled through the tunnel as fast as she could, her hands and knees scraping on the metal. Behind her, she heard Zelkor shouting orders, heard the guards trying to figure out how to follow her. But they couldn't. She had found a place where their size and strength meant nothing. She pulled herself through the narrow passages, heading away from the bridge. She knew these tunnels. Every cadet had to memorize ship layouts as part of their training. The maintenance tunnels connected to every major system on the vessel. She could go almost anywhere through them. After several minutes of crawling, Katie stopped in a junction where 3 tunnels met. She sat there in the darkness, catching her breath, trying to think. Her heart was still racing. Her hands were shaking. She had maybe bought herself a few minutes, but what now? She couldn't hide forever. Eventually, the Kreth would find ways to flush her out, or just wait for her to starve. And even if she survived, Morrison and Palmer were still locked in the cargo bay, waiting to be executed. Then she heard something. A voice, faint and distorted, coming through a ventilation grate nearby. She crawled to it and pressed her ear close. "Cadet is loose in the maintenance systems." Zelkor's voice angry and frustrated. "Search the ship, find her, and bring me the other 2 humans. If she doesn't surrender, we'll execute them in front of her." Katie's stomach dropped. They were going to use Morrison and Palmer as bait. She had to do something. But what? She was one person with no weapons against 20 trained Kreth soldiers. She sat there in the dark, forcing herself to calm down and think clearly. What did she have? She had mobility through the tunnels. She had knowledge of the ship's systems. She had the element of surprise. And she had something else, something the Kreth didn't seem to understand about humans. Humans were adaptable. They were creative. When they couldn't win through strength, they found other ways. Katie started crawling again, this time with purpose. She made her way to a junction near the power distribution systems. Through another access panel, she could see the main conduits that fed electricity throughout the ship. Most systems were damaged or offline, but some still worked. She carefully opened the panel and studied the connections. She wasn't an engineer like Palmer, but she knew basic maintenance. Everyone in the patrol service learned it. You had to, because sometimes you were far from help and had to fix things yourself. She found the circuit she wanted and started pulling connections, rerouting power in ways that didn't make sense unless you knew what you were trying to accomplish. Lights in Section 4 went out. Then lights in Section 7 came on at full brightness. Doors in Section 2 locked. Other doors in Section 5 started opening and closing randomly. She was making the ship behave erratically, creating confusion. The Kreth would have to spread out to investigate all the malfunctions. That would divide their forces and make them easier to avoid. Katie moved to another junction and found the communication conduits. The Kreth had locked out the main systems, but there were backup channels used for internal communication during emergencies. She spliced into one and adjusted the frequency. "Commander Morrison, this is Cadet Sullivan," she whispered. "Can you hear me?" Static filled the line for a moment. Then Morrison's voice came through, quiet but clear. "Sullivan, where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm in the maintenance tunnels. I got away from Zelkor. Are you and Palmer still in the cargo bay?" "Yes. They have guards outside. Katie, you need to get to an escape pod and leave. Don't worry about us." "The pods are destroyed, Commander, and I'm not leaving you behind." There was a pause. Then Palmer's voice joined the conversation. "Katie, what's your location exactly?" she told him. Palmer was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Okay, listen carefully. From where you are, you can access the secondary power grid. If you reroute power from the damaged sections to the auxiliary systems, we might be able to get limited control of some ship functions." "What good will that do?" Katie asked. "I don't know yet," Palmer admitted. "But it's better than nothing. It gives us options." Katie spent the next 20 minutes following Palmer's instructions, carefully redirecting power throughout the ship. It was slow, tedious work in the cramped tunnels. Her back ached from crawling. Her hands were scraped and bleeding, but she kept going. Gradually, systems started coming back online. Nothing major, but small things, internal sensors, minor control systems, secondary lighting. It wasn't much, but Palmer was right. It gave them options. "Okay," Palmer said finally. "Now we need to think bigger. Katie, do you see the Kreth warship through any of the viewports?" Katie moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost, following Palmer's instructions through the comm channel. She had been crawling for over an hour now, and every muscle in her body hurt. But she couldn't stop. They had a plan, and it depended on her doing her part perfectly. The Kreth soldiers were spread throughout the ship now, searching for her. She could hear them stomping through the corridors, shouting to each other in their harsh language. Sometimes they passed right below her position in the tunnels. She held her breath during those moments, staying absolutely still until they moved on. Zelkor was furious. She could hear him over the ship's internal comm system, which she had tapped into. He was screaming at his soldiers, calling them incompetent for letting one small human evade them. He had pulled more soldiers from his warship to help search. That was exactly what they wanted him to do. "Palmer, how many Kreth are still on their warship?" Katie whispered into her comm. "Based on the power signatures I'm reading, maybe 4 or 5. Zelkor has committed almost his entire boarding party to hunting you. The idiot is so angry he's not thinking straight." Katie allowed herself a small smile. Growing up on Titan had taught her that angry people made mistakes. You could use their rage against them if you were smart about it. She reached the next junction Palmer had directed her to. This one gave her access to the ship's atmosphere management systems. She studied the controls carefully, then started making adjustments. Not big changes, just small ones that would be annoying and distracting. She increased the humidity in Section 3 to uncomfortable levels. She dropped the temperature in Section 6 by 5 degrees. She adjusted the air pressure in Section 8 just enough to make ears pop. Small things, but they added up. The Kreth soldiers would be dealing with constant minor discomforts that would wear down their patience and focus. "Good work," Palmer said, monitoring her actions from the cargo bay. "Now head toward Junction 12. We need you to access the waste management systems." Katie wrinkled her nose. "The waste management? Really? Trust me, it'll be worth it." She crawled toward Junction 12, which took her deeper into the lower levels of the ship. The tunnels here were even narrower and less maintained. She squeezed through tight spaces, ignoring the way the rough metal scraped her arms. When she reached the junction, she understood what Palmer had in mind. The waste management systems connected to various parts of the ship through a series of pipes. If she reversed the pressure in certain sections, she could create very unpleasant conditions in specific areas. It took her 15 minutes to set it up, but when she activated the changes, the results were immediate. She heard shouting and cursing from the Kreth soldiers in Section 5. The smell must have hit them hard. It wouldn't hurt them, but it would definitely make them miserable and distracted. "You're evil, Palmer," Katie said into the comm, unable to suppress a grin. "I prefer the term creative problem solver," he replied. Katie kept moving, kept making small changes throughout the ship. She rerouted lighting controls so sections would randomly go dark. She adjusted door mechanisms so some doors would stick or open too slowly. She made the internal comm system produce random, static bursts that would interfere with Kreth communications. Each individual problem was minor, but together they created an environment of constant frustration and confusion. The Kreth were warriors trained for direct combat. They weren't prepared for this kind of harassment. They were used to overwhelming enemies with superior force, not dealing with an opponent who struck from shadows and then vanished. She could hear the frustration in their voices as they searched for her. They were getting tired. The environmental conditions that favored humans were wearing them down. The constant small problems were grinding away their patience, and Zelkor kept pushing them harder, which only made things worse. Katie found a good observation point near the main corridor and watched through a small vent as Kreth soldiers passed below her. They were moving slower now, their breathing more labored. The high oxygen levels were making them feel dizzy. The low gravity was throwing off their coordination. They were still dangerous, but they weren't operating at peak efficiency anymore. "Morrison," she whispered into the comm, "the Kreth are getting worn down. How are you two holding up?" "We're okay. The guards outside our door look bored. I don't think they consider us a threat anymore." "Good. Keep it that way. Palmer, what's our next move?" Palmer's voice came through, thoughtful and calculating. "We need to make Zelkor commit even more soldiers from his warship. Right now, he still has 4 or 5 crew over there. We need to get that number down to 2 or 3 at most." "How do we do that?" "You need to make him really angry. Make him think there are more humans resisting than just you. Make him think he's losing control of the situation." Katie thought about that for a moment. "I have an idea. Give me 20 minutes. She crawled to a different section of the ship, one where the Kreth had stored some of their own equipment. Through a vent, she could see crates of supplies they had brought from their warship. One crate was labeled in Kreth symbols she had learned to recognize during training. It contained comm units. She couldn't access the crate directly without being seen, but she didn't need to. She just needed to make the Kreth think someone else was accessing it. She crawled to the power junction for that section and started manipulating the circuits. Lights flickered, then went out completely. She counted to 30, then brought the lights back up. Through the vent, she saw Kreth soldiers rushing to check on their supplies. They looked around suspiciously, weapons ready, but found nothing wrong. She waited 10 minutes and did it again. This time she added door malfunctions. The soldiers were more agitated now. One of them spoke into his comm, reporting possible intruders near the supply area. Katie moved to a different part of the ship and repeated the process. Lights flickering, doors malfunctioning. She made it seem like there were multiple people causing problems in different locations. The Kreth couldn't be sure it was all just her. For all they knew, other human crew members had also escaped and were conducting a coordinated resistance. Zelkor took the bait. Katie heard him over the internal comm, ordering more soldiers from his warship to help search the Starbound. He was convinced now that multiple humans were loose on the ship, moving through the maintenance tunnels, coordinating attacks. "Palmer, how many Kreth are left on their warship now?" Katie asked. There was a pause while Palmer checked the sensors. 3, maybe just 2. Hard to tell exactly, but Zelkor has definitely pulled most of his crew over here. Good. Now we need a distraction big enough to give you two a chance to escape the cargo bay. Already working on it, Palmer said. I've been accessing some systems remotely through the terminals they left unsecured. Amateurs. Give me 5 more minutes. Katie used those 5 minutes to create more chaos. She found a junction that controlled the ship's artificial gravity generators. She couldn't turn them off completely without the proper codes, but she could make them fluctuate. She set up a pattern that would cause gravity to vary randomly between sections. The effect was immediate and dramatic. She heard shouts of alarm as Kreth soldiers stumbled and fell, unable to adjust quickly enough to the changing gravity. Some sections went almost to 0 gravity, sending equipment floating. Other sections spiked to higher gravity, making movement difficult. Okay, Katie, here we go, Palmer said. I'm triggering a ship-wide decompression alarm in 3, 2, 1. Alarms started screaming throughout the Starbound. Warning lights flashed red. A recorded voice announced in both human and Kreth languages that the hull had been breached and pressure was dropping. It was a false alarm, but the Kreth didn't know that. The soldiers immediately stopped searching and rushed to emergency stations. This was a survival situation that overrode everything else. They had to secure their positions and seal off sections to prevent actual decompression. In the chaos, Katie heard Morrison and Palmer making their move. They had overpowered the 2 guards outside the cargo bay, while those guards were distracted by the alarms. She heard the sounds of a brief fight. Then Morrison's voice. We're out. Katie, where do we meet you? Junction 15 near the docking bridge connection. That's our way to the Kreth warship. Understood. Moving now. Katie crawled through the tunnels as fast as she could, racing toward the meeting point. Behind her, she could hear Zelkor realizing what had happened. His roar of fury echoed through the ship. He knew now that he had been tricked, that the humans had been playing him from the start. All soldiers to the docking bridge, Zelkor commanded. They're trying to reach my ship. Stop them. Katie reached Junction 15 and dropped out of the maintenance tunnel into the corridor. A moment later, Morrison and Palmer came running around the corner. Both of them looked worse for wear, bruised and breathing hard, but alive and moving. This way, Katie said, leading them toward the docking bridge. They could hear Kreth soldiers behind them, closing in fast. The time for subtlety was over. Now it was a race to see who could reach the bridge connection first. Morrison had grabbed a metal pipe from somewhere, holding it like a club. Palmer had a toolkit that could be used as a weapon if needed. Katie had nothing but her determination and her knowledge of the ship. They reached the docking bridge entrance. The massive door was sealed, but the controls were still accessible. Katie's fingers flew over the panel, entering her access codes. The door started to open, but it was moving slowly. Too slowly. The Kreth were get Katie squeezed through the partially open door first, her small size an advantage. Palmer followed right behind her. Morrison came last, turning sideways to fit through the gap. Behind them, the Kreth opened fire. Energy blasts scorched the walls around them. Morrison grunted as one shot caught his shoulder, burning through his uniform. But he was through the door now, stumbling into the boarding bridge corridor. Close it, he shouted. Katie was already at the control panel on the other side. She slammed the emergency seal button. The door started sliding shut. Through the narrowing gap, she saw Zelkor running toward them, roaring commands at his soldiers. The door sealed with a heavy thud, just as Zelkor reached it. They could hear him pounding on the metal from the other side, could hear his furious shouts. But the door was solid and locked. It would take them time to cut through or override the controls. "Move," Morrison said, clutching his wounded shoulder. "We don't have much time." They ran down the boarding bridge corridor. It was maybe 30 meters long, connecting the two ships. Through windows on either side, Katie could see the darkness of space. She tried not to think about the fact that only this narrow tube separated them from the void. They reached the other end, the entrance to the Kreth warship. Another sealed door faced them. Katie studied the control panel, but this one was different from the human systems she knew. "Palmer, can you open this?" she asked. He looked at the controls, his fingers tracing the unfamiliar symbols. "Maybe. Give me a minute." "We don't have a minute," Morrison said. Behind them, they could hear cutting tools starting to work on the door they had sealed. The Kreth were coming through. Palmer worked frantically at the panel. "These systems are different from ours, but the basic logic should be similar. Power flow, circuit management, it all follows the same principles." Katie watched the door behind them. She could see the metal starting to glow red where the Kreth were cutting. They had maybe 30 seconds before the enemy broke through. "Got it," Palmer said. The door in front of them slid open. They rushed into the Kreth warship and immediately came face to face with two Kreth crew members who had been standing guard. For a moment, everyone froze in surprise. Then the Kreth reached for their weapons. Morrison moved first. Despite his wounded shoulder, he swung his metal pipe hard at the nearest Kreth. The blow caught the alien in the side, making him stagger. Katie didn't think, just reacted. She grabbed a tool from Palmer's kit and threw it at the second Kreth, hitting him in the face. It barely hurt the armored warrior, but it bought them a second. Palmer hit the door controls and the entrance sealed behind them, cutting them off from the boarding bridge just as Zelkor and his soldiers broke through on the starbound side. They were trapped now inside the Kreth warship with hostile crew, but at least Zelkor's main force couldn't reach them immediately. The bridge connection was sealed on both ends. The two Kreth guards recovered from their surprise and attacked. These were trained warriors, stronger and bigger than any human. In a straight fight, they would win easily, but the humans weren't planning to fight straight. Katie ran, not away, but toward the interior of the ship. She needed to find something, anything to even the odds. Behind her, she heard Morrison and Palmer fighting the guards. The sounds were brutal and desperate. She found herself in a corridor lined with doors. One of them had a symbol she recognized from her training, a universal sign for environmental controls. She hit the door panel, and it opened. Inside was a control room similar to what she had used on the Starbound. Katie's fingers moved over the controls, adjusting settings as fast as she could. She dropped the ship's gravity to near zero. She spiked the oxygen levels even higher than she had on the Starbound. She cranked up the temperature until it would be uncomfortable for the Kreth, but merely warm for humans. Throughout the warship, the sudden changes took effect. Katie heard shouts of confusion and alarm. The Kreth crew weren't prepared for their own ship to turn against them. She ran back to where Morrison and Palmer were still fighting the two guards. In the zero gravity, everything had changed. The Kreth were flailing, unable to control their movements properly. Morrison and Palmer, who had trained for zero-gravity operations, adapted quickly. Katie grabbed a loose piece of equipment and threw it at one guard. In zero gravity, even light objects carried surprising force. The metal box hit the Kreth in the head, spinning him around. Palmer grabbed him and used his own momentum against him, slamming him into a wall. The other guard tried to grab Morrison but missed in the disorienting conditions. Morrison caught a handhold on the wall and kicked hard, sending the Kreth tumbling down the corridor. Before the warrior could recover, Katie sealed the corridor door, trapping him on the other side. "Where's the bridge?" Morrison asked, breathing hard. Katie pointed. "According to the ship's layout signs that way, but we have maybe 2 more crew members somewhere on this ship. Then we find them fast before they organize a defense." They moved through the warship in 0 gravity, pulling themselves along handholds. Katie took the lead since she was smallest and quickest. She had grown up in low gravity on Titan, so moving in 0 gravity felt natural to her. They found 1 more Kreth crew member in the engine room. He was trying to restore normal gravity and environmental controls. Palmer didn't give him the chance. He came up behind the distracted engineer and knocked him unconscious with a heavy tool. "That's 3 down," Palmer said. "Maybe 1 or 2 left." They reached the bridge door. It was sealed and would require either codes or force to open. They didn't have time for force, and they didn't have the codes. But Katie had an idea. She found an access panel near the door and pried it open. Inside were the power conduits for the door's locking mechanism. She carefully disconnected specific wires in a sequence Palmer had taught her earlier. The door's emergency protocols kicked in. When a ship's power systems became unreliable, doors were programmed to open automatically to prevent crew from being trapped. The bridge door slid open. 2 Kreth stood inside. One was at the helm controls, the other at weapons. They spun around in surprise as the humans entered. Morrison launched himself across the bridge in 0 gravity, moving like a missile. He collided with the Kreth at weapons station, and they both went tumbling. Palmer went for the one at the helm, using his momentum to carry them away from the controls. Katie flew to the captain's chair and started accessing the ship's systems. The controls were in Kreth language, but many of the symbols were universal. Navigation, weapons, communications, life support. She could figure this out. Behind her, Morrison and Palmer fought desperately against the 2 Kreth. The aliens were stronger, but in 0 gravity. Strength mattered less than skill and adaptation. The humans had both. Katie locked out the weapons controls so the Kreth couldn't use them. She sealed interior doors throughout the ship to limit movement. She activated internal sensors to make sure there were no other crew members she had missed. The ship showed 5 Kreth life signs, all in locations where they had left unconscious or trapped enemies. No one else was active on the vessel. A Kreth hand grabbed her ankle, trying to pull her away from the controls. She kicked hard, and in 0 gravity, the force sent her attacker spinning backward. Palmer caught the Kreth and wrestled him toward a storage locker. He shoved the warrior inside and sealed the door. Morrison had the other Kreth in a hold, using a technique designed for 0 gravity combat. The alien struggled, but Morrison held on grimly until the Kreth finally went limp from lack of air. He would wake up later with a headache, but he would live. Suddenly, the bridge was quiet, except for the 3 humans breathing hard. "Is that all of them?" Morrison asked. Katie checked the sensors again. "Yes, 5 Kreth total on the ship, all accounted for. We control the vessel." Palmer laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "We actually did it. We took a Kreth warship with 3 people." Morrison pulled himself to the captain's chair, wincing from his shoulder wound. "Katie, can you pilot this thing?" She studied the controls. They were more complex than the Starbound systems, but the basics were similar. "I think so. Where are we going?" "Home, back to human space. And we need to send a message to our nearest base. Let them know we're coming in a captured enemy vessel before they shoot us down." Katie's fingers moved over the communications panel. She found the right controls and opened a channel on human military frequencies. "This is Cadet Katie Sullivan of the patrol vessel Starbound. We have captured a Kreth warship and are heading to human space. Request immediate assistance and guidance." Static filled the channel for a moment. Then a shocked voice responded. "Say again? You've captured a what?" "A Kreth warship. Long story. We'll explain when we arrive. But we also need you to know that the Starbound is still out here with Kreth soldiers aboard. You should send a rescue team." "Understood. Transmitting your current position to command. Stay on this channel." Morrison floated next to Katie. "Get us moving. Maximum speed toward the nearest human outpost. I want to be far away from here before Zelkor figures out how to cut through the boarding bridge connections. The Kreth warship moved through space at maximum speed, putting distance between itself and the damaged Starbound. Katie kept her hands on the controls, her eyes scanning the sensors for any sign of pursuit. So far, nothing. Zelkor was probably still trapped on the patrol vessel, trying to figure out how to get his boarding party back to his own ship. Morrison floated over to her station. He had managed to patch up his shoulder wound with supplies from the ship's medical bay. The Kreth medical equipment was designed for their species, but basic bandages worked the same for everyone. "How long until we reach the border?" he asked. Katie checked the navigation display. 6 hours at current speed, but Commander, I'm reading something odd on the sensors. What is it? There's a power buildup in the rear section of the ship. It looks like someone is trying to access the weapon systems from a secondary terminal. Palmer pulled himself over to another console and started checking. One of the Kreth must have woken up, or maybe they had someone hiding in a section we didn't check thoroughly. Morrison's face went hard. Can they take control of the ship from there? I don't think so, Katie said. I locked out most of the critical systems from the bridge, but they might be able to cause damage or signal for help. Palmer, you're with me. We'll check it out. Katie, you keep us on course and watch for any Kreth ships that might be responding to a distress call. They left the bridge, and Katie was alone. She tried to focus on piloting, but her mind kept wandering. Everything that had happened in the past few hours felt unreal. She was a cadet on her first mission. She was supposed to be learning how to do basic scans and follow orders. Instead, she had fought aliens, crawled through maintenance tunnels, and helped capture an enemy warship. The comm system crackled. Cadet Sullivan, this is Commander Helen Brooks of the Frigate Defender. We've received your transmission and are moving to intercept. What's your situation? Katie felt relief wash over her. The Defender was a real military vessel with weapons and trained crew. Help was coming. Commander Brooks, this is Sullivan. We have control of the Kreth warship with 3 crew members aboard. The ship is secure, but we have 5 captured Kreth personnel who are starting to cause problems. We also need medical assistance. Commander Morrison has injuries. Understood. We'll be in weapons range in 4 hours. Can you maintain control until then? Yes, ma'am. We're not giving up this ship. There was a pause. Then Brooks spoke again, and Katie could hear the smile in her voice. I'm reading your initial report. You 3 captured a warship with no weapons and no backup. That's either the bravest or craziest thing I've heard in 20 years of service. Probably a bit of both, ma'am. Morrison and Palmer returned to the bridge a few minutes later. Morrison was carrying an unconscious Kreth over his shoulder in the zero gravity, moving him like a large, awkward piece of luggage. Found him trying to break into a weapons locker, Morrison said. He's secured now. I think that was the last of them causing trouble. Palmer started working on restoring normal gravity and environmental conditions. We should probably make this ship more comfortable for us and less comfortable for our prisoners. Just to be safe. Over the next few hours, they worked to secure the vessel completely. Palmer explored the engineering systems, learning how everything worked. Morrison checked every compartment to make sure there were no more surprises waiting for them. Katie maintained their course and stayed in contact with the approaching Defender. As they crossed into human-controlled space, Katie finally allowed herself to relax slightly. They had made it. They were home. The Defender appeared on sensors, a beautiful sight with its clean lines and human markings. Commander Brooks hailed them. Kreth vessel, this is the Defender. Reduce speed and prepare to be boarded for inspection. Acknowledged, Defender. Reducing speed now. Katie brought the ship down to minimal thrust. The Defender matched their velocity and moved alongside. Through the viewport, she could see human crew members looking at the captured warship with amazement. A boarding party came across and secured the vessel. Medical personnel took Morrison to the Defender's sick bay to properly treat his injuries. Marines took custody of the 5 Kreth prisoners. Engineers started examining the ship's systems. Katie found herself sitting in the Defender's mess hall with Palmer, both of them holding cups of hot coffee and trying to process everything that had happened. Other crew members kept stopping by to ask questions or just stare at them. Commander Brooks sat down across from them. She was a tough-looking woman in her 40s with gray hair and sharp eyes. "I've been in the service for 23 years, she said. "I've seen a lot of strange things. But this tops everything. 3 people, no weapons, captured a Kreth warship. How?" Katie and Palmer looked at each other. Where did they even start? "They underestimated us," Katie said finally. "They thought we were weak because we're smaller and not as strong. They thought we would just give up and die. They didn't understand that humans are good at adapting and surviving." Brooks nodded slowly. "The Kreth have been expanding their territory for decades. They've conquered a dozen species. They win through overwhelming force and intimidation. They've never faced opponents who fight the way you did." "Unconventionally," Palmer suggested. "Desperately," Brooks corrected, "but also cleverly. You used their strengths against them. You turned their own ship into your weapon." A young officer approached the table and handed Brooks a tablet. She read it, then looked up at Katie. "This is the preliminary report from the engineering team examining the captured warship. Do you know what class of vessel this is?" Katie shook her head. "It's a Zelkor-class heavy cruiser. Brand new design. Only 3 of them in service. This is one of their most advanced warships. The intelligence value alone is enormous, not to mention the tactical advantage of having one of their ships to study." Palmer whistled softly. "We captured a prototype?" "More or less. The technology on this ship will help our engineers develop better defenses and weapons. You 3 just changed the balance of power in this sector." Katie hadn't thought about it that way. She had just been trying to survive. The next few days were a blur of debriefings and medical checks. Morrison's shoulder injury was treated properly. Katie and Palmer were examined for stress and fatigue. They all talked to intelligence officers, explaining exactly what had happened and how they had taken the ship. News of the capture spread through human space like wildfire. The media picked up the story immediately. A cadet on her first mission had helped capture an enemy warship. It was the kind of story that people wanted to hear, especially after years of watching the Kreth Empire expand unchallenged. Katie found herself famous, though she didn't want to be. Reporters wanted interviews. Other cadets looked at her with awe. Senior officers asked her to speak at training sessions. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable. 3 weeks later, there was a formal ceremony at Fleet Command headquarters. Katie stood in her dress uniform next to Morrison and Palmer. The room was filled with officers, politicians, and reporters. Admiral Richard Grant, the head of the human space fleet, stood at the podium. "Today, we recognize 3 individuals who demonstrated extraordinary courage and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds," Grant said. "When ordered to surrender and face execution, they chose instead to fight. Against 20 trained enemy soldiers, they not only survived, but captured an enemy warship. Their actions have provided us with valuable intelligence and proven that humanity has earned its place among the spacefaring species." He called them forward one at a time. Morrison received a promotion to captain and a medal for valor. Palmer received commendations and was assigned to study the captured Kreth technology. Then it was Katie's turn. She walked to the podium, feeling strange and disconnected. This didn't feel real. "Cadet Katie Sullivan," Grant said, "for exceptional bravery, tactical innovation, and refusing to accept defeat under impossible circumstances, you are hereby awarded the Star of Valor, the highest honor we can bestow. Additionally, you are granted early graduation from the Academy with full honors and promoted to the rank of lieutenant." He pinned the medal to her uniform and shook her hand. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. Katie felt like she was watching this happen to someone else. After the ceremony, reporters crowded around her. One of them pushed a microphone in her face. "Lieutenant Sullivan, how did you manage to defeat so many enemy soldiers?" Katie thought about the question. How could she explain what had really happened? The fear, the desperation, the constant improvisation? "I didn't defeat them," she said. "I just refused to accept that we had already lost. The Kreth assumed we would surrender because that was the logical choice. But humans don't always do the logical thing. Sometimes we do the stubborn thing instead." Another reporter called out, "What would you say to other young people who want to join the space fleet?" "I'd say that being in space isn't about being the strongest or the smartest. It's about adapting to situations and never giving up. Every species has advantages. Humans are good at surviving in conditions that would kill others, and we're good at finding creative solutions to problems. That's our strength." The questions continued for another 20 minutes before officers finally pulled her away from the reporters. She was grateful for the rescue. Later that evening, Katie stood alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. The captured Kreth warship was visible in orbit nearby. Engineers had renamed it the Defiance. It would be refitted with human technology and join the fleet. Morrison found her there. His arm was in a sling, but he was recovering well. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Katie admitted. "A month ago, I was a cadet worried about passing my final exams. Now I'm a lieutenant with a medal and reporters asking me for interviews. It doesn't feel real." "It is real, though. What we did out there mattered. It changed things." "Did it? The Kreth still have hundreds of ships. They're still expanding. One captured vessel won't stop them." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "No, but it changed how other species see us. Before, humans were the new kids in space trying to prove we belonged. Now everyone knows we're not pushovers. They know that if you back a human into a corner, we'll find a way to fight back." Katie thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe their actions had proven something important. "What happens next?" she asked. "For you? Whatever you want. You've earned the right to choose your assignment. Desk job, instructor position, research duty, anything." Katie looked at the stars for a long moment. "I want to go back out there, to the frontier, to the places where humans are pushing boundaries and exploring." Morrison smiled. "I thought you might say that. The Defiance needs a tactical officer, someone who knows how to think creatively and handle unexpected situations. Interested? You're commanding the Defiance? As soon as it's ready. Palmer is chief engineer. We need a good tactical officer to complete the senior staff, someone who won't panic when things go wrong." Katie felt a smile spreading across her face. "When do we leave?" 3 months. The refit should be done by then." They stood together, looking at the captured warship. It represented something new, something important. Humanity had proven it could compete with older, more established species, not through overwhelming force, but through adaptation and determination. The Kreth Empire had learned a hard lesson. Never underestimate a species just because they're small or new to space. And never ever assume a human will surrender just because the logical choice is to give up. Katie Sullivan had been told to surrender. Instead, she had seized an enemy base. It was a story that would be told for generations, inspiring others to keep fighting even when victory seemed impossible. She was a lieutenant now, not a cadet. She had responsibilities and duties, but she was also still the same person who had grown up in the tough mining colonies of Titan, who had learned that survivors don't quit. The stars waited. New challenges awaited. Katie was ready for all of it. 3 months later, the Defiance launched from space dock with a full human crew. Katie sat at the tactical station, her fingers ready on the controls. Morrison gave the order, and the ship accelerated toward the frontier. Behind them, Earth grew smaller. Ahead, the unknown stretched endlessly. Somewhere out there, Other species watched humanity with new respect, and perhaps a bit of fear. They had learned what humans could do when pushed too far, and if anyone ever threatened Katie Sullivan or her crew again, she would show them exactly what one determined human could accomplish. The Defiance disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying its crew toward new adventures. The legend of the cadet who captured an enemy warship grew with each retelling, becoming part of human culture and identity. When asked years later about that first mission, Katie always gave the same answer. "They told me to surrender. That just wasn't acceptable. So I found another option. That's what humans do. We find another way." It became a motto for humanity's expansion into space. When faced with impossible odds, find another way. When told something can't be done, prove them wrong. When ordered to surrender, seize victory instead. Katie Sullivan had shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, and the galaxy would never forget. Katie activated the ship's engines. They responded smoothly, more powerful than anything on the Starbound. The warship turned and accelerated, leaving the crippled patrol vessel behind. Palmer secured the unconscious Kreth crew members, making sure they couldn't cause trouble when they woke up. Morrison tried to tend to his wounded shoulder, but in zero gravity it was difficult. Katie piloted the ship, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline still pumping through her system. They had done it. They had actually done it. 3 humans with no weapons had captured a Kreth warship. Behind them, the Starbound was now just a distant point of light. Somewhere on that damaged vessel, Zelkor was probably screaming in fury, realizing that he had lost his ship to the humans he had planned to execute. Katie allowed herself a small smile. The Kreth had thought humans were weak and easy to kill. They had learned today that humans were something else entirely. They were survivors. They were fighters. And when you backed them into a corner, they would find a way to turn the tables on you. The journey back to human space would take several hours. But for the first time since the ambush began, Katie felt like they might actually survive this. They had a ship, they had a heading, and they had proven something important. Never underestimate a human who refuses to give up. Ting closer. Morrison stood ready with his pipe. "Katie Palmer, get through as soon as the gap is wide enough. I'll hold them off." "We stick together," Katie said firmly. "That's not negotiable." The door was halfway open now. They could see the boarding bridge beyond, the corridor that connected to the Kreth warship. Freedom was right there, just a few meters away. Kreth soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor behind them. Zelkor was with them. His face twisted with rage. They raised their weapons. "Go!" Morrison shouted. Katie crawled to a tunnel that ran along the outer hull. Through a small porthole, she could see the Kreth vessel docked beside the Starbound. It was huge, at least 3 times the size of their patrol ship. A boarding bridge connected the 2 vessels. "I see it," she said. "That ship is our way out," Palmer said. "If we're going to die anyway, we might as well go down fighting. And if we're going down fighting, we might as well aim high." Katie understood what he was suggesting. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was also their only real chance. "Commander Morrison," she said, "are you thinking what I think Engineer Palmer is thinking?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Yeah. I'm thinking the Kreth made a big mistake bringing us here. I'm thinking it's time we showed them what humans can do when we're backed into a corner." As the Kreth soldiers marched them through the damaged corridors of the Starbound, Katie started looking at everything with new eyes. She studied the soldiers, their weapons, their movements. She looked at the ship's systems, noting which ones still had power and which were dead. Her mind began working, analyzing, calculating. She was scared, terrified actually. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. Anger, determination, a stubborn refusal to accept that this was over. The Kreth thought humans were weak and helpless. They thought 3 unarmed people couldn't possibly be a threat. Katie looked at the armored giants surrounding her and knew they were wrong. They had made a mistake bringing humans onto their ship while thinking they had already won. She didn't know how yet, but she was going to make them regret that mistake.